but really, I know you've done so many different things, and Ian has just told me a little bit about you in terms of going from, janitor to running the place to later on in your life, you got into the aerospace business. I think you were in the aerospace business, but then acquired another company, and then that was acquired a few years later. Um, you've done so many different things. I'd love to just maybe kind of start from the beginning and maybe tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, the janitor thing was, that was when I was very young. I was 11 years old. My dad, I wanted an allowance, and he didn't know what an allowance was. I tried to explain it to him, and so he figured out that I just wanted some money because I didn't have any money in my pocket. So he ended up getting me a job with a janitorial firm. So I worked in Garden Grove, California, in the First Western Bank with a janitorial firm 2, 3 nights a week. They
Uh,
paid me,
and this
paid
is
me a
at
little
the
money.
and this is at the age of 11, right?
I was 11 years old. Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't been unemployed since. I've never not had a job.
That's
Stuff
pretty awesome.
like that. He wasn't high on education. He was high on, I was the ninth child, so he was very old school. He was a wonderful guy, just a superhuman being. He's the one that had to, after work, take me to my job and then pick me up afterwards. So he wasn't doing it, out of being malicious or mean or anything. He wanted me to learn hard work, and since I wanted money, that's how he showed me. He also charged me rent.
At 11 years old when you start
Yeah,
making an income.
yeah. As soon as he sat me down with my first cash, because even in those days, I was too young to be working. Um, he pulled tithing out. He told me to give 10% away. I remember asking him, who do I give 10% of my wages to? And he says, anybody. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for you. So I had to give away 10%. And then he charged me rent and room and board. And after I was all done, I had an allowance, you know, like cents a week or something.
Whatever was left over. Out of curiosity, how much was he charging you for rent?
I don't remember. I might have, for that first week's, let's say I brought him $10 or something. I don't know. It wasn't a lot, but it was a job, and I worked. And like I said, I worked ever since.
And then, so how long were you? So you started working at 11, and then at what point you were there for a long time? And you eventually kind of took up the
I'm
place.
there for a fairly long time. That the guy I worked for then ended up delivering papers to book stands and paper racks and things like that. So I ended up working for him early in the morning. We'd go like 4 in the morning. We'd drive to the different things, and I'd jump out and get the old papers and put the new papers in. So I worked for him for a while. His name was Mr. Bell. And then I ended up going to work at a building materials yard for a gentleman named Howard Pettigrew. And so I worked at the building materials yard until I graduated from high school. I graduated when I was 17, and Dad bought me a set of luggage.
You were done paying rent, right? You're out.
That's right. And that's when with his permission, I joined the Coast Guard. That's when I went in the service, because I didn't go on a mission for the church or anything. In those days, it wasn't kind of a rite of passage. I mean, it was rare that they had somebody go on a mission. I
Yeah,
never had a bishop ever talked to me about it or anything. So
that's awesome. So you went into the Coast Guard, and you were full time for a while, and then you were reserve in the Coast.
yeah, I went into the reserve program. So I was there for 2 years, and then when I got out, I was weekend warrior, and then once a month, and then 2 weeks a year for 5 years, and then it was inactive, but I was still on the rolls for like 8.5 years, I think, from 60 to 68.
But that's awesome.
Mhm.
That's really cool. So along those kind of same lines, as you got out of the guard, what did you end up deciding to do? You'd had kind of a lot of experience, more than most people, in terms of working in a variety of things all through
Well,
high school.
yeah, pretty much. I was a Future Farmers of America. I was an ag major in high school. I wanted to be a farmer until I found out you had to marry it or inherit it, and I wasn't about to do either one. So we had a little 5 acre plot that we lived on, and we had calves and things like that. Anyway, that's what I was going to do. I went to work on a chicken ranch. To be honest with you, sorting eggs, washing eggs, culling chickens, giving chicken shots, stuff like that. But like most kids who are that age, I met a girl, and Her mother was not real excited about me working at a chicken ranch and not going to college, or, had no desire, no intent of going to college, to be honest with you. And, she decided that wasn't a good idea. So she ended up getting me an interview at an aerospace fastener manufacturer that she was the executive secretary to the owner. And, and I went to work for her because I wanted to continue dating her daughter, who I ultimately married. We just had our anniversary, 58 years now.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah. Uh, she's a saint. Anyway, so I went to work for this aerospace company, and I still had I was working for an engineering department as a copy boy. I ran an oscillate machine and a thermofax, things you would not even know what they are, but they just need copies, wet copies or ammonia copies on. At any rate, so again, still no intention of going to college. I ended up having the chief engineer one day found me. I was in the bathroom at the urinal, and he comes in and stands beside me. He's at the urinal as well, and I knew his name. Jack Latour was his name, but I'd never spoken to the man. And he says to me when we're about finished, he says, "So where are you going to college?" And I says, "I'm not going to college." No more words. He went over and washed his hands. I'm washing my hands. He's walking out the door. He turns around and says, "Jordan," he says, "you'll be enrolled in college the next few weeks or you're fired." And then he walked out the door. I'm standing there with soap on my hands going, what just happened? Years later, I found out that her mother set him up to that. I didn't.
So she got you the job, and then she was going to get you fired.
Well, or go to college. And by that,
or go to college, true.
Or going to college. And by that time, I was very interested in marrying this girl. So I ended up going to college. Went to Orange Coast College, which is a junior college. I graduated with a lot of units because I kept changing my mind a dozen times what I wanted to do or be. And eventually, I transferred from there to Cal State University here in Fullerton and got a bachelor's degree. And then I went to a year of law school after that. I wanted a better combination of degrees in business and an MBA, because I was an econ minor and a business major, so the bachelor's degree. So at any rate, I wouldn't, if anybody asked me today what you should go to school for, I said go to finance and then get a law degree. Those two, if I could have hired people like that when I was running my own companies, those are the people I would have paid premium to get, because everything is getting more litigious and a lot of litigation, and you need to understand the contracts and stuff like that. So I would have loved to have had somebody who was right in business and had some basic law.
That's pretty awesome. My grandpa actually graduated from Cal State Fullerton. He was an engineer. Yeah. So many years ago, he built many of the buildings on the Brigham Young University campus. So that was kind of his career. Worked for the university. So that's pretty awesome. So did you go back into aerospace after that?
I never left. I did all of my schooling at night. Every bit of it. I didn't, because by that time I was married and started to have children. So I didn't get my bachelor's degree till I was 34. I mean, I was plugging away, thank goodness my wife stuck with me through all that. But yeah, I was until 34. And for the record, I was like 52 in 1994, would have been 52, something like that, when I bought my first company. So I guess it's never too late. I sold the first one in 1999. So
walk me through that, right? So you're in your 50s and you're making a huge shift, and you end up finding a company to buy. Like, how did you find the company? How did you finance it? Yeah.
No, really, it's not. I really can't say I'm an entrepreneur or anything like that. I had been working in the aerospace industry for a number of years. I'd had a lot of different positions. At that particular time, I was president of a group called the Aerospace Fastening Systems Group, a company called Microdot out of Chicago. And the parent company, Microdot, went into bankruptcy while I was still president of the Aerospace Fastening Group, which had 3 divisions, 2 here in California and 1 in Colenbrook, England. And I'd started out in, as a copy boy and a draftsman and a technical sales engineer and that sort of thing and then went into marketing, and then went into plant management and so on. So I'd had a lot of experience before I became president of this particular company. I always decided, I may just tell you this, I always decided that I was only going to hold a position for no more than 3 years. If I wasn't promoted after 3 years, then I started looking for a job. I never had to look for a job. I worked for one company, probably 13, well, I worked for two companies, at least 13 years each, and every other one, probably 4.5, 5 years, that sort of thing. So each time I got promoted somewhere, I always made sure the company knew that I wanted to be promoted or I was interested in more. When I was younger, I used to apply for every job that was posted.
Like within the company?
Yeah, if it posted a job, I didn't care whether if they posted a secretary's position, I went and applied. And you come in and they go, you don't, want this. I say, no, I don't want that, but I want you to know that I want more. So I'm coming. So I would apply for every job, but I didn't do that later on. But, that was one of the things I did. I used to have myself paged.
So you have them paged over so people would hear your name?
Who's this Jordan Long? Who's this Jordan? That was kind of a joke too. Anyway, probably couldn't get away with that today, but that's what I did. So at any rate, what happened was the parent company went into bankruptcy. They owed a lot of money to GE Capital at the time. It was a big lender. And so when they went into Chapter 11, and partway through that process, GE recognized that the companies I were running were the
glue. They were the ones working.
They were the ones that were making money and doing quite well. We were doing about $50 million a year out of the three divisions. And as a matter of fact, when they went into Chapter 11, I approached the owner of the company at that time if there's any possibility of buying the divisions I was interested in. He poo-pooed it and said, no chance. When GE got involved in the process, because they were the major shareholder, credit holder, they actually approached me late in the process after we'd already put the company on the market and I was doing presentations to sell it to various people, a lot of my competitors, unfortunately, that were coming in looking at the divisions. They approached me and said, would you be interested in a management buyout? And I said, whoa, you're kidding me. I said, I tried 9 months ago and it didn't work out. So long story short, myself and my staff put together a management buyout with the help of GE because they were the major shareholder. They bid their debt basically by the company. I had to sell my youngest child and everything to get enough money to buy a little bit of the company. I didn't own a lot of it. But we bought it we bought a company that I knew well because I'd been running it for probably, as president of the company, I've probably been running it for 3 years. Prior to that, I was the general manager of the largest division. And prior to that, I was the vice president of marketing, sales and marketing for the three divisions. So I knew the company inside out. I'd been there 10 years by then. And maybe not 10 years, maybe 8, something like that. Anyway, I'd been there for a while. So I knew the company inside out. There was no risk. I mean, I knew the company. And GE Capital was backing us. So anyway, we then went on a buying spree. We ended up buying 6 more companies, which we added to it. When we sold the company when GE Capital sold the company in 1999, which is just 5 years later, we were doing $220 million a year instead of the $50 million we started with. And we had,
wow,
at that point, we had 7 divisions because I closed one, the English plant I closed. We also had taken the company public, which was an interesting process. I don't think I'd want to do that again, but we did an IPO. And we were on the NASDAQ. Company was KTI. Anyway, so 5 years later, the company was sold. We bought it for $22 million. We sold the company 5 years later for, I think it was $367 million, I think.
So that's a pretty good ROI, right? In 5 years.
You can't even believe it. It was crazy, just absolutely crazy.
That must have been a pretty wild time. So how did you? So you're probably doing industry roll-ups with those 6 other companies. How did you target those? How did you approach those?
Yeah.
Did you know a lot about them beforehand, or kind of stumble upon them? How did some of those work?
Both. Some of them were smaller competitors, which we bought. Some were not. But uh, I'm, in honesty, I probably was not really prepared for all of that. I was kind of just ended up there, so I had to kind of learn a lot on the fly. That 5 years was probably the most tumultuous time in my life. Um, you're they say it's lonely at the top. It really is, especially when, GE Capital had to have a hands-off type thing because of a environmental issue at one of our companies, so they didn't have a place on the board. Selected most of the board. It was a friendly board. But did we have I think we probably we only bought companies that were in the same realm or industry that we were in. Um, I was interested in companies that were troubled a bit, but yet they had a high value added component to them in the sense that the raw material cost was no more than, say, 20% of the total cost. I wanted something where there was a lot of value add because that tends to be a barrier to entry for other people getting in.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, I wanted to have something that had their capital was more than just working capital. I didn't want just accounts receivable and inventory. I wanted assets. I wanted heavy assets, either not necessarily real estate. That's kind of iffy, but certainly equipment. I wanted a company who, if they had intellectual property, that was okay. But I really wanted more know-how, knowledge. People who I wanted to buy the people as well as the company, and that's another philosophy that we could spend time on. Um, we decided early on. I decided early on. I say we because I had my staff involved to a lesser percentages, and at that point in my life. But I decided early on that all I wanted was a 10% return on my capital, probably the average capital employed. I wanted a 10% return. Everything above that, I shared with the employees, from janitor to president of the company. So we always shared that. We never laid anybody off. That was another promise we made to our employees. We never, if we had a cutback of any kind, I would I would remove them from the company, out of the activities, the camp company, because what happens is if you leave people in place and they don't have anything to do, they create things to do. And you get a lot of non-value adding activities in your business that you don't want there. You have to keep daily weeding out non-value add activities because people will be industrious. They will try to do something and you want to get rid of that. So what I moved them into, I take them out of the business and put them in a continuous improvement class, a group, which I hired a specialist that would teach this. They would learn scatter diagrams and all the things associated with. Um, we used two processes. We used Hoshin. I'm not sure you're familiar with that. It's how you do. It's doing the right things, kind of a process. Lengthy process. You got to really be a believer to make it work, because you play a lot of catch ball. You go down the company and up the company, down the company, up the company, to try to get them to find three or four things that they do in their discipline that adds to the three or four things that the company's trying to accomplish.
So that's really interesting. So you took a lot of the money and invested back in the employees' futures and a lot of training and stuff.
Oh,
How did you come up with those types of incentives to make sure all of your employees were aligned with your too, and they also had a lot of upside? Is that something you had seen someone
yeah.
else do, or just something you believed in from your core from the very beginning?
Really, be honest with you, um, kind of, I kind of backed into that. I'll be honest with you. When we took the company public, um, I was making a large salary. I mean, I was granted a large salary by the board, and then I was granted options and things like that. So when the company sold 99, I walked away with millions. Not enough. Um, I always felt a little guilty about that because I was just another employee. Um, I hadn't risked a whole lot. Um, I always felt like the income I was making was disproportionate to the next guy lower than me. I still feel that way. I feel the Wall Street, the guys who ruin companies and walk away with You know,
Parachutes. Yeah.
yeah, I just don't understand that. I felt so I kind of in my own mind felt like, well, first of all, if I'm going to make any money, I make it when we sell a company. Beyond that, I just need enough to live my life, and where everything else I want to reinvest in the company, and besides the fixed capital, the assets that I can buy, uh, I want to invest in the people because they're going to make the money for me. I can influence maybe 20% of the people around me. That those 20% got to go in, influence 20% more. I have to be like a preacher, preaching the doctrine. We don't have any costs. There is no cost in this company. We have investments. Okay. Don't come to me tell me this is a cost. Come to me, tell me you want this money, and I'm going to get this return for it. Okay. So, and by the way, every quarter I'm going to review that to see if we got that return, because I want you to come to me with an honest number each time. I don't want you to come to me with a capital expenditure request saying, look, we're going to get this internal rate of return and you're going to get paid back in 2 years. And so I need this $4 million, Well, I'll give you the $4 million, but guess what? 3 months from now, we're going to double check and see what you're doing. And then 3 months from that, 3 months for that, until I find out that what you're telling me going forward is correct. And by the way, this is your company too. Yeah, when we, a couple, it got to the point where, in all honesty, Ryan, I couldn't, it got so much momentum going with people involved in it being their company. I couldn't have changed it if I wanted to at one point. I mean, I remember walking through the plant one day, and on a tool crib, there was a big check that they had made and put on the tool crib and had written a number in there, let's say $67,000. Let's say, I don't remember what it was. I'm looking at them and going, what the heck is that? So I was scratching my head, and one of the maintenance workers came up to me. He says, you know what that is? And I says, no, I haven't got any idea what that is. And he says, that's what we scrapped last month. He says, that should have been in our bonus pool. We shouldn't have scrapped those at 67,000. I'm going, what? So I got shipping and receiving clerks that know we scrapped $67,000 and know who scrapped it, by the way, what department and where.
Yeah, there's accountability there.
Well, it's like their company, not mine anymore, So, I had to learn a thing called guided discovery, I call it, because I found out I wasn't necessarily so much in charge anymore. Because I would say we did the Hoshin, like I said, which was doing the right things. And then we did Kaizen events during the year, which was doing them right. So doing right things right is Kaizen. And we adopted those. You could adopt any one of those, continuous improvement type things, but those are the ones we adopted and lived with. And we assigned, each division would do like 4 a year. We would take these people who we were going to lay off, and we'd put them in these programs to learn Kaizen and, other methods, run charts and so on. And they would, then when we would, through attrition or through growth, hopefully, we would then put them back out on the floor or in the business where they were going to go to work. They came out with all this knowledge, and I would find out that they'd be running events that I didn't even know about. They weren't doing 4 a year, we're doing 15 a year, because they'd see an opportunity to improve their department. They'd improve the department. And what am I going to do? Tell them no? They go ahead with it.
So much of what you're talking about is like, it's so interesting because so much of what you were doing was in reinvesting back in them, their own education, and allowed them to have upside in the company and, extreme accountability, right? So I'm keeping my counterpart accountable, and he's keeping me counterpart, and she's keeping all of us accountable, so that if one of us makes a mistake and there's a big check of $67,000, that's the bonus that didn't get split 3 ways.
Let's talk about it. How do we stop that next time?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you're all on the same team, rather than you have these inner departments who, one department doesn't want to share information with the next department, and that sort of thing. That's incredible. And so you were able to kind of create that organization, and then you sold that company, correct, right? So that was the one you sold in 99?
I had a small percentage of the company. GE Capital had the most of it.
Yeah. And they were the ones financing the acquisitions, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Or we were, because we were making a lot of money. So we were financing part of them. They were financing part of them. We were borrowing. And I learned a lot from GE Capital. You know, for example, your debt to equity numbers, how far do you stretch it? In a fixed asset kind of business, heavy asset kind of business, where you can borrow a lot of money against assets, inventory, accounts receivable, that sort of thing. Um, you can go to a higher percentage, but GE Capital in those days didn't want to go more than 30% of your equity. And the last company I owned, we had zero debt. We decided to follow my partner was not a member of the church, but I talked him into the fact that we would get out of debt altogether according to how the church felt. So I
Yeah.
kind of,
It and then, so that's fascinating, Jordan. With your next company, you had zero debt, and from what he was telling me, you acquired Aerofit in 2004, correct?
we did. Yeah. Yeah.
Was that the next kind of business that you got into after 99, or am I skipping a gap there?
No, that's right. I had a 3-year non-compete. Well, I stayed with the company that bought us for a year. And then it was kind of typical of everything else. That's about all I could handle. So we amicably we parted ways. I had a contract with them, but we parted way amicably. So yeah, and then in 2004 we bought Aerofit, and that was interesting because it was a company that I consulted for a little bit during that 3-year hiatus kind of thing, kind of retirement. I didn't really retire, but I stayed busy. But one of the things is I went and helped them out a little bit for about 18 months. The guy who started it had passed away, and his wife was running a company. Again, it was one of these companies that had tremendous intrinsic value in my mind. They had a lot of qualifications in the industry, and this was the fittings industry. It was basically plumbing for a plane. And they had more qualifications than anybody else in the industry, but they were just so poorly run. It was unbelievable. And she wouldn't, she was a housewife basically, but she just couldn't let go of money. She couldn't even pay for raw material, for open orders, that sort of thing. So anyway, when I, at the end of 17 months, I kind of said, or not 17 months, 9 months, something like that. I said to her, Myrna, I'm going to go back to doing nothing, basically, but I would love to buy your company, So I in fact, I wrote her a check and put it on her desk. She should have taken it because probably a year later, I got a hold of the guy who used to be my chief financial officer at KTI and asked him if he wanted to get back in the business. He said yes, and I said, well, we ought to start looking for a company, and so we hired a broker and we got together with some people who had some more money than we did, and we started looking at large companies, $200+ million companies. But we turned out to be a little bit conservative. We probably I bet we looked at 100 companies. And we bid on probably 10, I'm guessing. And every time we came in second because he was a bit of a penny pincher, which turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. We'd miss him by a little bit because we were just too conservative. We didn't see that goodwill side of it. We couldn't pay much for the goodwill side. Anyway, it ended up that I had left her a letter. What I didn't know while I had left Aerofit was that they basically were close to be going into receivership. They were within weeks of the lock being put on the door by Union Bank.
Wow.
And
So they were close.
Yeah. I got a call from the Union Bank people and said, look, we just discovered that you were interested in buying this company. I said, yeah. I said, are you still interested? And I said, yeah, probably am. But at that time, we felt it was a little small for us. They were doing maybe $10 million a year. And Dave and I thought, but at that point, we were so discouraged about being able to buy a company. We thought, well, let's get our foot in the door with this one and we'll see what happens. So, it was losing money every month, but we bought it for a song, honestly. I think I might I don't even think up it. Uh-oh, did I lose you?
Nope. So cut out there for a second.
Yeah, I lost my visual. Hold on a second. Huh, that's interesting. I'm back to a Zoom.
Can you see me now?
No, maybe you don't want to be seen. Hold on a second. Let me go back one and see what happens. Now, you still there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, there we are. Okay. At any rate, it ended up, like I said, we bought it for like, I bought, my half was less than 2 million. It might have been 1,700,000, something like that. We turned a cash positive in probably 60 days. I mean, it was just so poorly run. And we kept the company from 94 to the end of 2012, December of 2012, we finally sold it. And that's just because I was getting older and I felt like I'd like to. David was the same birthday, just 10 years younger. So, and we sold it, 80% of it for 88 million. So that was like, what is that, 8 years later? Great. But we were also doing about 50 million in sales and, we were making a lot of money.
That's pretty incredible. So, you're going from 10 million a year in revenue, you're able to kind of turn it around. It's basically going bankrupt, and in 8 years, you are back up to 88 million and highly profitable. And even in 60 days, it was highly profitable. Um, you had been consulting with them, so this is kind of an interesting structure when I think about buying companies. Is you were involved with a lot of these companies that you acquired before you actually acquired them, so you knew them really, really well getting in. So you're probably comfortable with that risk.
Yeah, again, I kind of I kind of knew what I wanted. We kind of knew the type of company we wanted to be involved in. And again, it was something that had not just working capital. I didn't want a company that everything was inventory, you know what I mean? And receivables, just inventory receivables. There's a lot of those around, a lot of the .com companies that went bankrupt because that's all they were. I wanted something that was a lot of value added in the process. I wanted to take something that took, ugly oily wire and made something shiny and pretty out of it with, a lot of value added, machining, heat treating, plating, whatever. So as long as it fit that kind of a type cast, then those are the companies we were interested in. That's what KTI bought. After we sold 80% of the company, I stayed on as the chief executive officer for what we call consolidated aerospace manufacturing. We subsequently bought 5 more companies. So I was involved in all those acquisitions. And then, I felt like in every instance, you had to determine if you really had a seller. A lot of times, the guys you were interested in weren't really sellers. They wanted to know how much the value of the company was, but they weren't going to sell the company. And a lot of them were family-owned stuff too, in that industry. Then you had to establish value, which I felt was probably the easiest part of all of it. You certainly could determine everything except for the goodwill. I mean, the inventory was good or bad. Usually in my industry, the inventory was never obsolete. It might have been old, but it was hardly ever obsolete. There are a lot of older planes still flying and boats and, whatever else. So you could establish the value of the inventory. You could establish the value of the equipment. You pretty much everybody agree on that. Then it just came down to, how much does the guy really want for the company? And you'd whittle away at that the way you normally do to get a proper number for the company. So value wasn't bad.
So thanks so much, Jordan. This is really incredible to go back and kind of look at this timeline. And you almost stumbled into some of these acquisitions with the help of GE Capital, and you kind of always had that in your mind of like, I do want to acquire a company, or even acquire the division when things were not going so well back in the 90s. And then you were out searching pretty hard with your partner, hitting the
Yeah.
pavement and stuff. Saw 100 companies. I've been part of bidding processes. I was actually part of one 2 weeks ago, and I lost out on a software company, and I was second. I was second in line.
Going there.
Very, very similar to you. So, going back, say, with what you know now, what would you go back to, like, say, your 35-year-old self, and what would you say? What advice would you give?
Or sooner.
Start sooner.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. Like I said, I was 52 when we bought the first company, and I was just kind of forced into it. I was president of the company, and my parent company went bankrupt, and I had an opportunity to do management buyout, basically, offered by the main lender. But I will say this, I wouldn't have had that opportunity had we not been running a good company. I mean, the things that I was incorporating in the companies we owned were things I tried or was implementing in all the companies that I'd been running up till then. So, there's a lot of years of experience from, that 11-year-old to
Yeah.
the 52-year-old in 94. So,
Did,
so
did you ever did you ever thank your mother-in-law for getting you your first aerospace job and ultimately led to being CEO and all these other acquisitions?
yeah, I did. Matter of fact, well, she didn't know about all that. She ended up with some Alzheimer's and passed away, but,
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
she didn't know much of that. In fact, 'cause she wasn't around when I bought the first company. So, but if I had to tell myself, I'd just say start sooner and don't be, out of all the companies, I've tried to figure out how many companies we bought. So I think we bought probably 14 or 15 companies over the years and sold two basically. And so we consolidated those companies. And the thing I discovered was, I guess, number one, I don't think there's a primer. Every negotiation was different. I think the thing I determined was, if I could come, especially if you're buying from a family, it's not so much all the things I mentioned before, the type you're after, or is it really a seller? What's the value? Once you get past that, a lot of times you can pay less for the company than the guy you're bidding against if you can structure the deal such that it's beneficial to the guy. And a lot of that has to do with intrinsic. Some of it has to do with real value. Some of these guys are selling, but they don't really want to. They don't really want to retire. This is their sweat, blood, and tears, So if you can keep them involved in some peripheral way that does not impact the way you run the company going forward, because that's a problem, can be a real problem too. Then if you can work that into the deal, makes sense. If you can do it in some kind of a different payoff so that, it's beneficial for their family or their estate planning or that sort of thing. A lot of strategic buyers, like if GE was buying another GE company, they just pay, or stock. It would be equity or cash, that sort of thing. There's not much else they can do. But if you come to them with like a private equity company or with your own coin, cash, you can structure the deal better than most anybody else. And so structure the deal sometimes, depending upon who you're buying, becomes critical. I mean, it can really make the difference. You can pay less for the company in today's dollars than your competitor would and still be a better deal for this guy 5-10 years down the line for him or his estate.
So would an example of that, Jordan, be like you have a deal, and if they get all cash right now, then they have to pay all the taxes right now, but you're maybe structuring some kind of earn-out based on certain revenue things, or just seller financing a portion of that over time so they essentially could make more money, but you're using the profits and the cash flow of the business to pay them out? Or what's an example of that?
I'll give you a perfect example. When we sold Aerofit, we didn't sell it all. We sold 80%. We sold it to the second highest bidder. Company called Pacific Cast Parts, big outfit, was a higher bidder, and so was Alcoa at the time. The higher bidder, but we ended up selling to a private equity group out of New York, who allowed us to keep 20% of the business. Now we sold for $88 million in 2012. I sold my reduced because it got
diluted.
I found that it got diluted over time, but I sold that for another $29 million. I couldn't have gotten that back in 2012. They wouldn't give me another $30 million. And that was my half. So it's $60 million more between my partner and I on top of the 88. I mean,
So that's a fascinating way to think. They built.
Well,
Go ahead.
Here's what it boils down to. So give me the money. What do I do with it? I put it in the stock market. It's like going to Vegas. What do I do? I'm 70. At that time, it was 75, 74. What do I do? Start another business? I don't want to start another business. How do I protect that money? Where do I know I can make the most money? It's in owning businesses. That's where I can make the most money. Do I trust these people are going to run this business. I'm not only trusting them, they're going to make me CEO until I can find somebody I like to put in my place. By the way, it took me 4 years, but nonetheless, we found somebody, and during those 4 years, and then I stayed on the board, so I knew exactly what was happening to it. You know, all the way up until we sold that company again to Black and Decker. Stanley Black and Decker is the one that bought it in 2012. So we kept it for 8 years after they bought it and sold it to Stanley Black and Decker.
Okay, who then sold again, right?
No,
So
no,
gotcha.
Stanley owns it right now. They bought it in February this year, just before the crash.
Oh, interesting. So you had enough trust in the company that bought you, and did they come to you and say, "Hey, why don't we let you keep 20%? These are our growth plans. We think you can have another big payout," or they just kind of presented it and said, "Hey, we want you still involved"?
The beauty of it is this is a private equity group that is friends and family. There's no institutional money in it. When you're selling a company, the interview goes both ways, right? I mean, you're meeting the buyers, which
Yep.
is, you so, we were as interested in who buy it. We wanted our employees protected. We've been very good with them. We made sure they got payouts and protection and all that good stuff. But we had a lot of faith in these people. They had a track record of not flipping companies. In other words, they kept them at least 10 years. They had a track record of reinvesting, just like we did. They put every dime back in the company. A lot of the people we were dealing with, a billionaire, the guy who's the managing partner and the owner, basically, he and two other people, that was involved in it 12, 14 hours a day. I mean, he was younger and not that young, but I mean, he was involved. It was a Studebaker family. Back on Studebaker was where it came from. So, so they were ideal, and they turned out to be as good or better than we thought they were. Every time I would come to them with a potential acquisition, they gave me people, we did thorough due diligence on every company. We didn't buy every one, of course. Those we bought turned out very well. We didn't hire for Consolidated Aerospace Manufacturing, CAM, is what we called it. We didn't buy a clunker. KTI, we bought 2 clunkers.
You win some, you lose some.
They say that the best deal you ever made is the one you didn't.
I have heard that a few different times.
Says that, but they're absolutely right.
Yeah, sometimes you look back at the ones that got away and you're glad they got away.
Exactly. But here, and I think as I look down the process of doing all that, I think the 2 things that I think are most important are the structure of the deal, as we talked about, but after that, it's the assimilation of that culture. You have to recognize that there is a culture in every company you buy, and you have a culture, and because you're the acquirer, you don't superimpose your culture on that one. What you do is you take the best practices of both and create a new culture. Very difficult to do, because people get set in their ways in certain things. But if you can do that, then literally you can take a company you buy for $22 million, sell it for $368 million 5 years later, because you buy right and you assimilate right. You consolidate what you can. That makes sense. That doesn't take the personality and the entrepreneurship or what do you want out of the division. Accounting, assimilate it all, bring the numbers together all you want. Engineering, maybe not. Sales and marketing, maybe not. On paper, it looks great, but if you put too many things in the salesman's bag, he only sells what he knows. He doesn't sell the other stuff, and so you lose that.
Or he sells what pays him the most.
But you have to be careful with that. You have to be careful about interdivisional pricing. There's all kinds of potholes you can fall into when you're assimilating a new division in with a bunch of other ones.
Well, Jordan, this has been incredibly fascinating. I know our listeners are going to love this. I appreciate so much of your time and so much of your parting words. Thank you so much for a few minutes this afternoon.
Not a problem. My pleasure.
Hey, thanks so much.
You bet.